So one of the things that I kind of use as a really great example about queerness is actually this idea of like species that really exhibit different types of behaviors that go outside the heteronormative Western science models of not straight. However, we have to really understand that gender is heavily influenced by sociocultural norms in our human society. Animal species, fungi species, plant species do not follow that culture. It's not about saying that there's gay penguins and there's gay giraffes, which is like really cool. Like I'm saying, like it's interesting to see it, but it's to really say that heteronormativity has constructed a lot of the ways that we really think from the processes of what we work. And what queer ecology is saying is that it's not about putting a rainbow on it and being like, you're queer. It's about thinking that there's multiple solutions that exist within this issue that need to be addressed. But because we operate in such a narrow, resource-based, heteronormative, reductionist, science-based models, that is constructing with queerness as what it's saying, that there's different answers to everything. And there's no such thing as a natural thing in nature. There's only unnatural things, because in nature, like, yes, we are nature, but we are imperfect human beings. So to say that there is a set way to live is already contradicting the ways of how other species live, because it is cool to use it as a metaphor of the ways that animals, fungi, and plants really exhibit their sexes or whatever they are. But again, like, it's to go really deeper than that.
Climate change. We've never faced a greater threat. Yet all that we produce and consume inflates the debt of greenhouse gases we release. We feel them raise the temp, and the tempest we'll unleash will leave us weeping to forget, unless we take collective action, make a pledge to finally change our ways and keep climate change in check, to benefit the planet and all of its inhabitants. We know it can be done, so listen up and join the quest.
And climate change demands that we change everything that we do. Chad's Climate Quest is brought to you by Regen Intel, activating humanity to become a planet-positive species. Find out more at www.regenintel.earth. Today we're joined by Isaias Hernandez, the creator of Queer Brown Vegan, where he makes accessible environmental educational content based on justice and inclusivity. A passionate environmental educator, Isaias' mission is to dismantle systems of oppression by exploring the intersections of social justice and sustainability. With a background in environmental science, his passion for environmental justice is driven by an ethos of community and kindness grounded in science. Though through his work, Isaias offers his unique perspective as a queer brown individual, challenging norms and inviting a diverse community to partake in the dialogue for a more sustainable and equitable world. Hi, Isaias. It's great to have you on the show, and thank you for coming along my climate quest.
Yeah, hi, Chad. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Isaias, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I've been a huge fan of your work, as you know, for a long time, and it's been such a pleasure to see a thoughtful, articulate leadership representing the younger generation of environmental activists. And what I particularly appreciate about your approach is this intersectionality of issues, the more holistic perspective that you bring. I'd love to know what set you off on this journey, this holistic journey. And was there a moment when, young Isaiah said, I'm going to dedicate my life to systems change? What got you on your climate quest?
Yeah, as many environmentalists, their affinity or their relationship to the land has always been something that's very sacred. As someone who grew up Mexican as first generation, my parents are from Mexico. I think, growing up in poverty really shaped the experiences and the relationships I had with the land, but also the ways in which I invested or interrogated spaces in environmental fields. I think for myself, I always had this really deep curiosity as a kid. I always liked to touch mushrooms. I like to hug trees. I like to sit on trees. I just really loved being outside. But I think as I got older as an adult, I started to kind of really ask questions. I think, I always make this really funny joke is that, like it was really like back then when conspiracy theories were maybe harmless before they became more QAnon. It was focused
Right.
on like, is the Earth going to go through an ice age again, or like, what is climate change, or what's geoengineering going to do? I was very curious of just asking questions of like, why is our environment designed this way? Like, is it because it's corrupt, or is it because of something else? And I think when you're young, you kind of have this idea. You watch these YouTube videos, you're like, okay, great, like it's something weird's happening. But then you start learning more about policy decisions and like the ways our government functions and democracy works. You're like, oh,
Right.
it's actually not that this hidden shadow figure that's happening. It's literally just because like our policies that are being placed are really hurting us, and we need to change that. And so I think when I went to college and did an environmental science degree, I was really focused on learning about not just the political side, but how the science, both physical, biological, and natural sciences, are really applied when talking about climate solutions. And I think for me, what I learned from that is that it is so important to really educate yourself on climate literacy, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
really important to understand like a holistic way of the ways that you're engaging these conversations. Because the truth is, like when you talk about climate change, like people are probably turned off by it. They're like, yes, I acknowledge it to a certain extent, but what else do you want me to know about it? So I think for me, like adopting this circular lens kind of came from like obviously my identity as someone who is brown, someone who didn't see themselves as a quote unquote environmentalist, but also someone who just really had this passion to ask questions without this idea of feeling the need of not being smart enough to ask those questions.
And it's that kind of intersectionality that really sets you, I think, apart from a lot of the activists that I encounter. And I work with a lot of younger activists in the climate world, and I think what you bring is this really interesting perspective that you just kind of touched upon, and this concept, this identity of queer, brown, vegan, right? I mean, this is the platform that you've launched. How did this come into being as as this educational and advocacy platform that you are using and leveraging to educate, different audiences, generations? Like, where did
Absolutely.
that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it came from the fact that after college in 2018, I know that we both mentioned that we lived in Berkeley, go Bears. At the time, I remember graduating in 2018, I was a senior, and I said, okay, I did everything that I was supposed to do to be an environmentalist. Now my goal is to do some media work in an environmental nonprofit. Fun fact, while I was at UC Berkeley and I did a lot of academic science and research in undergrad, I was also helped run the social media of UC Berkeley's school page. So
Oh, wow.
I had this background of marketing and design and experiences, and also worked in fashion organizations. So I had this really huge creativity of like media, marketing, and environmental science. But I was like, okay, that does not make any sense. And so when I got out of college, I applied to all these like really good big green NGOs, like the ones that you're always told: Greenpeace, NRDC, the Nature Conservancy, WWF. Like, that's the big dream that you should be going towards. And I got interviews for all of them. They're all like informational interviews. Some of them made it to the second round, and then I got rejected. And they collectively shared some of the feedback. They said that I did not have as much good climate work documented. And I was confused by that because I said, well, I have research and I also like did activism. So I'm kind of confused. Like, was I supposed to be taking pictures of me being an activist? Was I supposed to be taking pictures of like creating my own nonprofit? Like, I didn't do any of those
Yeah,
things.
right.
And I felt like, it was a wake up call for me to actually do something else. So I actually moved to New York and worked at a fashion agency for 2 years and a half. And that's when Queer Brown Vegan came into fruition, because I felt like, everyone who moves to New York, it's like a work hard, die hard situation. And I was on the subway and my friend said, why don't you create an environmental page just for fun, talking about climate? Because you're so passionate when it comes to environmental things. And I said, no, I don't want to be those like activists or those influencers that put my life on there. I don't want to take up space. It seems
Wow.
like,
Wow.
and I was really against it. I really was like, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to be seen as something. And my friend's like, just do it. Like, you're not saying you're an activist. You're saying you're an educator. That's what you want to do. So I created it in November 2019 on this basis of like, I just want to teach people environmental education in a non-form of traditional media. and outside of the academic institutions based on my experience. And what better way is to make it queer, brown, vegan? Because I was like, I just want to be out there that people don't need to be like, are you queer? Or like, what's your race? Like, are you what? Like, I just wanted to be out there to be like in undergrad. I didn't really talk a lot about my identity as a Latino because I said, oh, you don't want to bring race into it. You're just focusing on the climate. I didn't want to bring my queerness because I was really scared in undergrad when I worked in a research lab where my professor was literally homophobic. I was like, I don't want to even say anything because if I say something, then it's seen as a bad thing. So I was just like, let me just put myself honestly out there. And if people don't like me for it, that's fine. But at least I don't need to like feel hidden or like people asking like, what's his sexuality? You know, it's like, I don't care anymore. It's like, it's out there. Like it did, the brand actually did it. And also the second thing from a marketing standpoint is that, to be honest, like it's really hard for people to remember my name. Like people don't know how to spell my name, Isaias, correctly. I remember once the professors called me Isis, and I was like, I don't know how you got that pronunciation out of my name, but it was this kind of like, you know, I always felt like if people can't pronounce my name right, I should create a brand that's so easy to remember that on the street you'll be like, I know your name starts with an I, but like I know you're queer, brown, vegan, so I feel comfortable talking to you.
Wow. I mean, it is funny. Nobody remembers my name, Chad Frischmann. I mean, Frischmann's a hard name as well. They remember me as the drawdown guy, right? So I hear you. Sometimes those brands can become our identities. But this brand that you have, though, is really putting yourself out there. I mean, you're wearing your identity on your sleeve, and I am so just. I don't know. I'm just amazed and proud and like excited for you for doing that. Also, as a queer person in this space, like we need more of our voices out there, open and so transparently talking about queerness and climate, because you know we know our community has really fought hard to be noticed, to be identified, to be able to be respected in this world of ours. And we still fight every single day, but we fight with that joie de vivre. We fight with that joy and inclusivity. And that's what I love about this approach that you take in your activism to climate. But it's a bold statement. I mean, it's not an easy thing to be wearing your identities on your sleeve like that. Have you encountered backlash? Have you encountered any, adversary, any kind of anyone coming at you, questioning your identities and so on? Like, have you had any stories to share about challenges that you faced coming out in this way as queer, brown, and vegan? Because we know that vegan can also be a challenging identity to have sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think just being able to embrace those identities and those values comes with a double-edged sword, right? The one sword is like, yes, you get to be able to stand your ground and know that like you're representing future generations, like you did too, to me too, where it's like, I'm glad when I found you, I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad to find like an older generation queer person that's like a millennial, and like I'm in the intersections of like millennial Gen Z, where it's like, you did so much work in this movement, and I could only imagine how harder it was back then to even navigate the space, where now it's like seen as a celebratory thing versus back then it's like hush hush, we understand that you are what you are, but we don't want to hear about this in a climate policy discussion. So I think on my end, the other half is actually battling within homophobia and like the isms that exist, like using the username queer, brown, vegan. And to be honest, in a lot of institutional policy spaces, my knowledge and my expertise is actually doubted. They think of me as an influencer, which is fine. I don't have really an issue with the term influencer. What I have an issue is that for me, like I am someone that came from an environmental justice community. I'm someone who put myself into those academic research experiences. And I'm someone that's outside of those spaces now working with academic institutions and like other nonprofits to help communicate climate science. That why is it the fact that you will then not see me as an expert just because of the username, just because it makes you uncomfortable. And I often felt that in many speaking events that I did at climate, events, it's really, really, really weird to always see after. It's like, I didn't know you know how to speak that eloquently. I didn't know you knew how to debate policy. And I'm like, yes, because you guys continue to choose the same, and not to throw shade at anyone, but the same youth activists that will throw and regurgitate we need youth in the room. And it's like, I'm not going to say that anymore. I think everyone knows it. What I'm going to add is actually an extra layer of dimension that allows people to critically think more and to really push the boundaries of the ways that we really construct narratives around climate. And I think that to me has also been really having my early years of my career is fighting for that space, because like I again, like the experiences is always disregarded of like, oh, well, you're just an influencer with 100,000 followers. And I was like, no, not just 100,000 followers, and someone that comes from these communities, and someone that actually did environmental science. So don't ask me of how I know all these things, when like I put myself through a very rigorous program to understand the logistics on here, so I can actually be engaged in this conversation.
I think it's incredibly bold, and it's a challenge in the scientific and research communities to be so open about our identities, because it's often seen as something you don't talk about. So if you are this queer brown vegan, this is what you are in the social media space. This can run into some really serious challenges when you're trying to talk about science, talk about research, because they see this often as something that, well, we don't want to even get into that. We want to stay objective to the dynamics of your identity. But if you're putting yourself out there as that, I think it's incredibly bold. I think it's incredibly important. We need a lot more folks like yourself out there saying who you are, who your identities are, but then backing that up with being able to communicate the science, the facts, the reality of what's happening on the ground, and doing it in a way that's actually super engaging and exciting and educating. Yeah. And you do this on various social media platforms. I want to talk a little bit more about that. First of all, what are the social media platforms that you think are most engaging for your audiences, and how do you utilize those platforms in ways that, address those audiences, and what's the impact that you think you're having in the social media space?
Yeah, I think when we talk about climate media, since it's an emerging field that's coming out in the last few years, just like, sustainable jobs or green jobs are coming out more in demand, it's like, it kind of comes from the fact that back in 2016, even in college, I remember telling a professor that I wanted to do something with environmental and social media, and he laughed and he said, I don't think that really exists. Like, that's not needed. But then, like, actually, to really illustrate my point, is that I worked like a year and a half ago with Pearson's Global Learning Survey, where I talked about a research study that they conducted with ages, I think 16 to 30 something. And they found that in America specifically, out of the data set of the population of around 10,000 plus people, that 25% of those people were learning issues about climate through social media. So that's like a 1/4 of my generation specifically, was learning about these issues. So there is this strong case to be able to develop social media for narratives. But I would say that, I'm on all platforms, which is very unique strategy that I did, recognizing that I didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket, because that would have really been dangerous. I think that different platforms use it for different mediums, like LinkedIn, for example. Honestly, it's such a weird space when it was in 2017 to now. It's been years since then. And I realized that back in LinkedIn, maybe early career of Isaias, it was all old people saying these random stories, I never gave up, and that's why I created this business that's worth $10 million. And it's great, all these success stories. But then we're younger people. I'm really just just journaling about my experiences in my career and what I'm learning. And I think a lot of people are really invested in that, because I'm documenting those real life experiences. Whereas Instagram was kind of used as a platform for Gen Z and millennials and older people to really get engaged with environmental content, make it fun, make it accessible, make it known that it's doing that. And I think YouTube was really to really add that expansionary values of those videos of look, I don't expect you to become a climate expert within a 10 carousel infographic. I know there's limitations to that too. Right. So can I create a 20-30 minute long form episodic series that actually explores these relationships of talking about these terms, but also working directly with academic scholars who've done this work that would be able to leverage them too in their work to be I want to learn about this. And I think it's cool to have intergenerational collaboration, because the reason why I'm here today doing this work is because of the many people who have really written about this work that I've been able to add my own critique on, or add my own view and lens on additive to that work.
And that's a rare characteristic or quality, I think, that you have, Isaias, that in this social media influencer thought leadership world that I think dominates so much of our culture these days, you recognize, you honor where that knowledge is coming from. It is your thoughts, your opinions, your ideas that come from a diversity of perspectives that you lift up, you leverage, and you acknowledge. And that's a rarity in this space, I find. And I appreciate that. I want to thank you for that, because there's so many of us who've been putting out our energy, our work, our thoughts, our knowledge for so long. And to see it represented in next generation communicators and influencers is really an honor that we can be, working together in this intergenerational capacity. But I also think you provide these skills and ways of communicating that those of us who've been in this space for a long time don't necessarily have. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because we know that education is such a powerful tool for change. And your approach in creating this, your accessible environmental content, educational content on these social media platforms, aggregating this knowledge, collecting this information from so many other folks, and then communicating in really accessible ways. What are some of the ways in which you've communicate and the messaging that you offer on your platforms that resonate most with your audience? Is it humor? Is it emotions? Is it sticking to the facts? Like, what is like the sweet sauce, the secret sauce, the secret sweet sauce that you offer on your platforms?
Yeah, I think as I would always describe myself as like a generator. So like, like using from spirituality and like just like ways of personalities. Like generators are typically people that generate energy and like give to others. So like there's different types of groups. I think there's people who are meant to be specialists. Like if you're a climate scientist working very focused on emissions and methane and greenhouse gas, that's your niche. Own it, do it. I'm more of a generalist of like, I'm willing to engage in different topics, from like nuclear to like green jobs to cellular agriculture. Like these are topics that I just want to engage and learn more about, but also have a discussion thoughtfully about it. And I think what has really helped me is that the audience that I have today is that depending on each platform, each one's like really has a different interest. Like I have people that are academic scholars who really don't really resonate with my personal life, or they're like, it's cool what you're doing, but I really just follow you for the science. And I think that, it's kind of like a platter, right? Like it's like a buffet. I would say that my page is really much for different people to come and like take what they need and leave. It's not so much of like, are there people who stay there for everything? Yes, like there are committed people, but I really think on my end, like, what has helped me really do better storytelling is actually capturing the narratives of people. So like the web series that I started working on specifically, it's called Teaching Climate Together. It's an inspirational lot from a lot of PBS shows that were like nature science shows that were talking about like the importance of nature. But what I wanted to do is actually started from my original idea of like my original infographics that I used to say like, what is climate change, or like going to more holistic like definitions of like what petromasculinity, what are all these like these terms mean, what's queer ecology. I wanted to really expand that and say, okay, like my viewers are not just interested in learning from me. They want to learn from other people. So the series itself, that's actually, I have episode 2 and 3 coming out very soon because I like worked so much on them. It was about really making sure that like we can make climate media fun. Like there's a huge interest for people wanting to talk more about these things and wanting to hear from experts in their specific fields of what certain terminology has meant to them. And so the Climate Teaching Together series was actually interesting because I think when I demoed it out, I didn't have any funds. Like I only had like maybe 4,000, 5,000 that I got from this project. And I put it in this project and I said, what if we create climate media that's just inclusive and educational? And, to it was a really success because like, even though the viewership was 1,000 on YouTube, it got, almost 100,000 views on other platforms. And people were like, this is such a really interesting idea that you're someone that's just producing independent media that's non-traditional. It's also not production owned. So like, it's something that I think can help get creatives to understand, like, even if you're not interested in doing climate change, maybe you can work on set with me and film because that's your passion to do videography, or like maybe your passion is to do makeup artist. Like I need a makeup artist when I get on those like, web series. And I think the communication style is all about education rather than interrogation. So what we've learned in my page is that if we spitball more than 2 facts, no one's going to remember anything. Like it's important to have them. I'm not saying it's not, but I think it's like what people want is that they don't want answers anymore. They want reframes to the answers. So what I usually do with my audience
Huh.
at the end is that I never give them an answer, and they get mad at me and they're like, well, what's the answer? And I said, the answer, this is my answer, but this is not your answer. You need to figure out your own answer. However, I'm going to lead you with provoking questions to ask yourself inside, like, what is it that you want to achieve? And so I think that has helped a lot of people be like, I like your platform because it's not always giving me solutions, and it's sometimes giving me things to think about internally to be like, okay, I need to work through this.
So it's about mindset shift. I mean, you're trying to reframe, looking at the same challenges that we're facing, same solution sets, for example. But how do you reframe that in a way to resonate with the individual and the community that your audience is? Fantastic. And you mentioned this a little earlier. I want to touch back on this. This queer ecology. Can you give us a definition of queer ecology? It's a term that I'm not super familiar with. I've read a few of your posts about it, but for the audience, can you give us a definition, queer ecology, and how does that fit into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to know about queer ecology is that it's honestly a very confusing term in academia. Like, I've had to reread so many papers about it just because I feel like in the beginning, in the early days, I was like, I don't really understand what it means. But I would say that for me, like, the simplest definition I always tell people about queer ecology is that it is an expansionary valued lens that helps us understand the relationships beyond the binary of the ways that we usually view the world, right? So I think what I always tell people is that queerness is an expansionary tool to liberation, right? The idea that in nature, right, we say this is like in nature for itself, like in our industrialized capitalistic society or in academic research, often at times the justifications around abstracts for science papers is resource acquisition or interrogation. So a lot of the times a lot of researchers are going to these foreign lands that they're not indigenous to. They're like, we're researching about the lost species of amphibians here. We want to be able to understand what's happening, or we want to go and examine and take samples of the soil and to extract. What queer ecology is saying is that it's saying that we need to be able to understand the multi-species of the dimensions of the ways that we're navigating the world. So that also recognizes that what is true is not sometimes true in the world of heteronormativity, because in a heteronormative world, we've been often really normalized to this relationships of either male or female, and like either it's 100% yes or 0% no and you're wrong. What queerness is saying is that we're challenging these assumptions to say, what are the truths that are uncovering from these scientific research? So one of the things that I kind of use as a really great example about queerness is actually this idea of like, right, there's these examples of like species that really exhibit different types of behaviors that go outside the heteronormative Western science models of not straight. However, we have to really understand that gender is heavily influenced by sociocultural norms in our human society. Animal species, fungi species, plant species do not follow that culture. What they do follow is diversity and they go against uniformity. So what queer ecology is trying to help us understand is we need to challenge these very dangerous assumptions that have been given to us in this world to say that, certain people are illegitimate or unnatural because they're opposite to what the standard society and our social culture norms have influenced, when we know that's been heavily influenced by the patriarchy, capitalism, sexism, homophobia. And so what I tell people is that queer ecology has allowed me to understand more of like, it's not about saying that there's gay penguins and there's gay giraffes, which is like really cool. Like I'm saying, like, it's interesting to see it, but it's to really say that it's to say that heteronormativity has constructed a lot of the ways that we really think from the processes of what we work. And what queer ecology is saying is that it's not about putting a rainbow on it and being like, you're queer. It's about thinking that there's multiple solutions that exist within this issue that need to be addressed. But because we operate in such a narrow, resource-based, heteronormative, reductionist, science-based models, that is constructing with queerness as what it's saying, that there's different answers to everything. And there's no such thing as a natural thing in nature. There's only unnatural things, because in nature, like, yes, we are nature, but we are imperfect human beings. So to say that there is a set way to live is already contradicting the ways of how other species live, because it is cool to use it as a metaphor of the ways that animals, fungi, and plants really exhibit their sexes or whatever they are. But again, like, it's to go really deeper than that.
And this is one of those reframings. This is a reframing of a mindset shift in how we think about the systems that we're operating in, right? And this queerness, and queerness isn't really necessarily about whether you're gay or lesbian or transgender. It's something completely different, right? It's about how your outlook about your own identity is in this diversity of the world, right? There's not one set way to be. There's not one binary system. Your heteronormativity, as you're saying, and it's a diversity of ways of being and operating in this world, and being free and open and transparent to who you are and to your authentic self, right? And I think that lens that you're applying, this is a great example of what you do, right? Exactly. You are not telling, well, this is the solution. You're saying, let's reevaluate our systems. Let's reevaluate our connection to each other and to nature from a different perspective, a different framing. Let's look at it as a queer. And I 100% agree. And this is why a lot of my work around queering climate and queering spaces is very much connected to this. How do we approach this space? Not to say that, all the lesbian, gay, transgender folks need to, LGBTQ people need to, be part of the climate movement, but it's how we look at the climate movement itself, and to have that diversity and openness of expression, and how we can find these new solutions, ways of thinking. So I really appreciate that you have introduced this concept of queering ecology. I feel like I live it in some ways, and now I'm introduced to the concept itself. So I really appreciate that. And it's such a fascinating way in which you have really interwoven your own intersectional identity, queer, brown, vegan, into your work. And I really appreciate that. And, you also are one of these amazing figures in the younger, I don't want to say necessarily youth, I don't like the concept of the youth activist, but a younger generation of activists who are able to wear that and to that identity on your sleeve, as we said earlier, and communicate the science in real ways. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the harder aspects of being a younger activist in the world today. And you've been doing it for a long time now. When did you start? When would you say you first started really identifying as a younger activist and putting yourself out there as an activist in the world?
Yeah, it's really funny you say this, because I think when I was 17, I did already organizing. So like a lot of what I did with environmental justice work was actually language translation. I didn't see it as environmental justice work. I was just like, oh, I'm just helping the community. And I also did a lot. And like when I was a teenager, I worked a lot of jobs. Like I did tree planting initiatives. Like I worked at one point, with like senators that are now in, the California Senate now that are bigger. But I remember working with them as a teenager, like planting trees. Plus, they don't pay you that much money, which is like messed up as a teenager, but it is what it is. I think that in college, when I entered, I really was always someone that was on the back end. Like I always listened to the frontline leaders. I always listened to the elders. There was always those young activists with the big microphones that are like, I'm going to be leading the group. And like they're leaders. Like I always saw them as leaders, but I just saw myself as like, I don't know how to talk about it. Like I felt like I was still formulating my thoughts. So throughout my years in college, I did environmental activism work of like attending the protests. I never took pictures of it. I never posted on my social media. I guess you could say that I was just complicit in some of the behaviors that were really toxic from climate youth movements, of people being like, I need to be centered, or I'm supposed to be doing the speech. And I was just like, I'm not even here to do the speech. I'm just here to write down what do you need help in, and I'll do it from the back end. So after that era of my college years, I was just like, it's so wild that a lot of people like really do want the fame. Like it's okay to say that, but I was just like, I don't desire it. But there came a point when I left college and I was an adult, my friends were like, Isaias, you need to do this work. Like you need to like talk about it, because people would benefit from you. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I just think people really need to I don't want to be centered because I don't want to deal with that social media thing and then the drama and everything. They were like, just do it. I think that, I'm 27 now, and when I was 23, 24, and 25, I was like, yeah, like youth climate activist. But I think like as I've gotten older, like as a 27-year-old now, it's like I don't really attach myself ever to the youth activist. I always call myself an environmental educator. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
education can be a form of activism too, but I always felt more comfortable saying environmental education because I wasn't the one at the front lines of protests. Like I wasn't the ones that was getting arrested. Like to be honest, like I would always say that like, activist comes with a huge privilege. And I know that digital activism is also valid for those with disabilities and can't go and protest outside. But I also just thought myself like as a someone that's building a long-term career, like I don't think I want to claim myself as an activist yet. Like there's so much more I want to be able to like really work on. And I felt that like environmental educator was more aligned with who I am, because an educator for me was about someone who just teaches people in the intro level. And I think that's what people expected of me, of like people wanting me to become more deeper and like more extensive with my work, which I can, but I also felt like my duty as an educator was to just teach people who don't know anything about climate. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
there's certain times when it's like there's certain people that need to graduate from your page of like, look, you're not learning from me anymore, which is fine, but you need to go to the next level of your activism or your work, because you're going to be upset with me not evolving to you, and that's not
Yeah.
fair to me either.
What are some of these characteristics of the activist that you're trying to, pull away from? So you say, I think personally, I think there's a role for activism
Yeah.
throughout one's life, right? I think it's a really important part. I think everything I do as a scientist, as a researcher, as an educator, as an organizer, as a coalition builder is a form of activism. But I also recognize exactly what you're saying. Like there are some aspects of activism that can be, super challenging. Something I don't always want to be associated as the activist, per se. Can you talk a little bit more about, what are some of those characteristics of an activist that you find, you resonate with, and what are those characteristics that you kind of push away from?
Well, I think as someone that's kind of, as I'm getting older, and I love to have grace of getting older is actually an act of like resiliency in the climate movement, is that some of the characteristics I really have pushed away from is this very binary set mind of values that young activists do it. It's like, if you like, for example, as a media creator, it's like if you do ads, you're a sellout and you're not a real activist. If you eat meat, you're not a climate activist. And it's like there's like very these dangerous assumptions that even people put out there that I'm just like, the world is so nuanced, like it doesn't work that way. And like
Yeah.
reality check, I got my reality check out of college of like, oh wait, your dream was to work at a very radical climate justice org, but then you realize they don't pay you anything and that you're being exploited. I don't want that for
Mhm.
myself. And I think that there is always this mindset of like people wanting to be like, my work is more radical than yours. And I'm just like, at least I have money to, support my family and like myself
Right.
and my team. Like, I don't know, like as you get older, your priorities change. And I feel like there was these characteristics of like youth activists that I've met that were very dangerous, who then I later found out that they grew up upper middle class and that their parents were paying everything for them. I'm like, of course you can say all this radical
Yeah.
liberatory language because your parents will always be there for you. My parents were like, all right, you're done with college. How are you going to help us out? And it's like, I had to think about that already as a young person. Some of the characteristics I do love about the climate youth space is that I do think that I think that it's a very dynamic space where I think a lot of
Mhm.
creativity is emerging from different industries that are now coming together. I'm not here to say that that's never existed before in other movements, but I think that we have this very unique space with digital media. Like a lot of us grew up with digital media, and a lot of the older climate activists didn't really. So now they're on it. But I think for us, like we're creating really new narratives and new values. And I think I always really appreciated the creativity from young people of like always wanting to experiment and go against the status quo. Cause I think as an artist and educator myself, I always felt like, like there must be something more to make the climate movement more fun. Like I don't want to just listen to Bill McKibben like in his articles,
Yes.
which I think
Mhm.
he's really great, by the way. I love him. But it's just like I don't want to listen to him. Like I want to listen to young people and like making new jokes and pop culture and seeing that. And I think the other thing I push against with climate youth space is the sacrificial mindset. Is that if you're not working hard, then you're not doing the work. And it's like that's so toxic because as someone who has a chronic illness, I always tell people once your health is gone, no one will be there for you. Of course, you'll have friends and loved ones there, but who's going to pay your medical bills? Who's going to be there at the hospital visits with you? The same people who criticize you for doing an ad are not going to be there. And I had to realize that, like, for me to be able to really thrive in this movement long term, I need to really give myself rest and breaks. And that's really helped me, because honestly, like, the work I'm doing, it's not about virality, it's long-term sustainability. Like, I promise you, Chad, like 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, like, my name will still be relevant. The people who decided to really go full on force and, call out people left and right and all this stuff are going to be gone and forgotten. And like, that's not to say that they didn't do anything. It's just to say, like, I'm here for long term. So I'm going to preserve my energy. You do what you think is right for you, and you have your truth about me, but I have truth about myself that makes me feel happy at the end of the day.
Right, it keeps you going, right? And it keeps. We need that more longue durée. I mean, the longer duration for folks that, like yourself, who are in this space, and because this is not going to be solved, and frankly, climate change is not going. Crisis is not going to be solved in 10 years.
Exactly.
This is going to be living with us for generations to come, right? Exactly. Even if we stopped all emissions today, as you know well, if we stopped all emissions today, we still have built-in climate change. It's still going to cause terrible devastation to our human and natural systems. And so this isn't something that we want to burn our candles out to, shine brightly, but burn it out too quickly, because we need folks like you and others to be with us in the years to come. And I make that distinction about youth and younger really, it's intentionally, because there is the youth movement, and then there's a younger generation of activism. And I would count you as a younger generation activist, because you're just younger than my generation, right? And so you're coming into this space, and you're coming from a tremendous amount of work that you've already put into it as even a younger person. You're coming in, you're the next generation for sure. But there is that challenge as you're bringing up with the youth. And I find that tension myself. I've mentored and I've worked with a lot of youth activists over the last decade, and I've seen a lot of the same things that I love about the youth activists, and a lot of the things I'm challenged about. And one of the ones I think you touch upon here is this centering themselves as as not just the voices, but I think also sometimes as the experts in this. And I think this could be kind of dangerous. I think it's really important to have youth out there with their voices heard and talking about the things that are meaningful to them and their experience allows. And then maybe not necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty details of specific solutions. Now, I'll give you an example. I know this one amazing youth activist, amazing voice on stage, and really passionate. And at one point, this activist got asked to speak about the details of geothermal energy to NATO at a NATO conference. And I thought to myself, wait a second, like, I appreciate having that voice on stage to hear about the perspective of youth. But when you start having to talk about geothermal energy to an organization like NATO, I had to scratch my head and say, is that the right place and space to be having youth activists on stage? And I have to question that. I really did have to question that because we do want those voices. We do want those feelings. And I think particularly about, what all of us are experiencing, eco-anxiety, this fear of what our future holds for every generation, frankly, but particularly youth generation, younger generations, yourself, I'm sure, and even younger. When they look to their future, what does that future hold for them? That eco-anxiety. And those are the voice. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear that passion so that we can have a wake-up call to so many people to take action and see what the experience and the fears of these youth actually are. And to that point, I want to talk maybe a little bit about eco-anxiety and what's your kind of thoughts on this, and in your experience, like, how do we channel and direct these emotions in constructive ways, because it could also be very, debilitating and sometimes even I just want to crawl in bed and cuddle up and be like, oh my gosh. But I pull myself out. How do you find ways to channel these emotions in constructive ways. And, particularly as, even younger generations than you coming into space, like what are some recommendations you have?
Yeah, well, I think for me, like when I first heard the term eco anxiety, I remember I was like in college. I think it was 20. I was like in an environmental science class, and the professor's like eco anxiety, and I kind of laughed. I was like, "What the heck is that?" Like, and then they're like, "Oh, it's the fear of the future of the planet." And I was like, "What the hell? That sounds like a privileged thing. Like, I can't even afford rent, professor." Like in my mind, I was like, "I can't even afford my rent, and I'm working 3 jobs in Berkeley. Like, why would I guess I love the planet. I know I can't do much right now because I'm a student and an activist, whatever, but like, why would I care about that?" And I realized that was a very, like, obviously everything is nuanced, everything is layered, is that things can coexist. And I think like the more and more I delved into my upper-div courses in environmental science, and I tell this to a lot of people like that do majors in the environmental field, is that they really just teach you how to make profit off the land. Like I took a course in forestry, went to harvest forests. I took a class on fisheries of how fishermen work and how their economies work. And like everything goes back to capital of like, if you can make a strong case to help the planet via capitalism, then you're doing the right thing. And like, that's how my brain was programmed. So I think like as I got deeper into it, I was like, wow, we're really messed up as a society. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So what really helped me kind of like understand that like these these terminologies can just coexist in these feelings is that during the California wildfires in 2020, when everything was pitch black, or the pandemic and everything, I remember just realizing that like, no, I don't have anxiety anymore. I have anger. And like my anger is more deeper than just feeling anxious now, because I'm angry that kids that are 10 years younger than me don't have the same environment that I did growing up here in Los Angeles. And I'm angry
That's
about
right.
that because now it's like, right now we're in November. It's literally 80 degrees in LA. Like by end of September, things were getting cold 10 years ago in LA. Not anymore. That's not the case. And so I think for me, like the ways that I really use my anger was through education to like teach people. And so like I think the ways that really helped me is just like really talking about my personal experiences with eco anxiety, but also like my experiences with just wanting to like do better for the world in terms of like the work I put out there should be based on love and not hatred. And I think that like it was really good for me to like talk about different climate emotion words that existed out there by other scholars to make sure that younger people like don't feel it themselves, because I realized like if I was internalizing it, then I messed up already, because there's so many like other people that are going through the same thing that I'm going through.
I think we all need little support groups, to be honest,
Yeah, we
working in the
do.
space, right? Intergenerational support groups where we
We
can like
do.
be there for each other as we go through and feel all these emotions. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not just eco anxiety, it's eco anger and eco love,
Yeah.
right? And eco gratitude. And there's like, and not even eco, it's just cut all that out. And it's really just anxiety, anger, love, connectivity, because these are the emotions that we feel not just in response to climate change, but in as your work so clearly illustrates, it's everything else that's wrong with the system. Everything else that's
Yeah.
built in this, embedded into this system of inequality, injustice, and how do we translate those emotions into, those constructive actions. So I really appreciate that. And I think you do a really good job also on your social media. And I could be getting this wrong, Isaiah. I could be getting this wrong, but my memory is reflecting, and you correct me, but I seem to recall one post I really liked from yours where you are, it's kind of like you superimpose yourself, I think as a press room, like a press room in the press room of President Biden or
Oh
something
yeah.
like this, right? And you kind of grilled him, and it was like a cool way that you pretended to be a reporter. And I thought, like, there's like you were really challenging that, and that was that sense of being quirky, funny, intelligent, challenging, and like grilling the press. I thought that was really great, and we need a lot more content. I think like that blends those emotions, right? And like makes you feel coming out. Made me feel coming. I kind of chuckled a little bit because I
Yeah.
thought like how funny, weird that was that you're like superimposing yourself, and then that's actually a smart thing he said. Yeah, and yeah, he's right, and we should be challenging the president on these things. So, that's the kind of intersectional way of engaging in education I think we need. Like make this
Exactly.
engaging.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think, we're already kind of past our time quite a little bit. I hope it's okay.
All
But
right.
I have at least one more. I have tons of questions I can always ask you, Isaiah. So maybe we'll have you on again as
Yeah.
a guest. But one final question that I ask all of my guests, and this is a challenging one, but it could be maybe it's easy for you. But looking forward into the future, what is your vision for an ideal, regenerative, and inclusive future? And how do you see your work contributing to that vision?
Yeah, I think for me, like in a regenerative, inclusive world, that things are much more localized and like controlled by communities and like decisions made by communities, because I really think that like local elections really matter. I mean, we all say that like they don't, but they really do matter and they make decisions. But I do think that there needs to be more autonomy and more implementations of, like, let's say we can't get like a climate change declaration in the United States, in the country. Can we get one in our city? Can we get one locally on our street? Like, these are more things that actually add a sense of values of like, okay, well, we know that if a wildfire strikes, like, Biden's not going to help us, the very first person that will greet us. It will be the community that helps us.
Yeah.
And it's not to throw shit at the government. It's just to say, like, they have to prioritize different things in the world. And so I think on my end, that's really what I really want to do, is like to be able to know that's like future. And I think for me, part of me is that as someone that really has been exploring a lot of my quirkiness and like comedic and like sometimes horribly scripted videos, that my friends like always laugh at me, and I'm just like, I know it wasn't that great, but it's like the point is to make fun of me.
It's
Is
good.
that I think, like, I want to get into TV and media to teach people. I don't want to, and I always tell this to people, it's like, as someone that's doing climate media, like, I don't want to be the next Bill Nye. He's done such great work. I don't want to be the next whatever like TV host that has done something cool. I want to be the next queer brown vegan. Like, I honestly just am like, I don't need to be defined by people in the past who have done things that help them get to what they want. I want to get to where I want to showcase the other, specifically queer people, Latino people, people who are plant-based or vegan, that you can do this. And like, that's my goal. Like, none of those people that people always try to reference me as, I'm like, they're not, I'm sorry, but they don't look like me. And like, they don't have my identities. And like, I want someone to be really re-ingraining in you past. So I hope to get like a TV show in the next few years. And like, I'm learning how to like, write shows and things like that, pitch one in the future.
Okay, well, Netflix, if you're listening, Isaias Hernandez, queer brown vegan,
Hire
has
me.
got a show for you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Isaias, for joining me today on My Climate Quest. We've really learned a lot from you and your inspiring story, and I think you are an inspiration to so many people who are connected to your social media profiles, but also, when we see you on stage, when we hear you at different events, you really represent, such an intelligent, sophisticated, and fun, joyful approach to the work that we do. So thank you. And I'm sure our listeners are, like me, really excited to take that inspiring energy that you're offering into our lives and into this journey that we're all on together. So thank you all as well for joining us today. I'm thrilled to welcome you on My Climate Quest. This podcast is brought to you by Regen Intel, a public benefit advisory and education platform training the next generation of leadership for a better planet, and co-produced and distributed by our incredible partners, Better Worlds, Source Studios, and Chiconomy. Special thanks to Michael Katijian, aka Inverse K, for the incredible intro number for Season 3 of this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. And to learn more about Regen Intel, check out our Foundations program at www.regenintel.earth/education. Applications are accepted all year round. See you next time on Chad's Climate Quest.